Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. I'm sure that by now a lot of you have heard about the so-called Zizians, which is a transgender cult that's been in the news lately for bad reasons. Well, if you don't know the story behind them, I do think that it's worth noting. I'll explain why at the end. The leader of this cult is Jack Lasota, who now identifies as a woman, and Lasota is a strange bird, to put it mildly. Lasota got a computer science degree in 2013 and moved to San Francisco afterwards. Lasota then started a blog and claimed to have applied for a series of jobs at tech companies and startups, including a brief internship with NASA, and began to associate with people involved in the so-called rationalist movement. It's an intellectual trend popular in Silicon Valley and emphasizes the power of the human mind to see clear truth, eliminate bias and bad thinking, and improve individuals and society. I guess we can file this one alongside Scientology, only without the celebrities. It was around this time that Lasota began blogging under the alias Ziz. Lasota also was fascinated, if not outright obsessed, with Star Wars, to the point of making a blog entry saying, "Sometimes cops harass me for wearing my religious attire as a Sith. As a Sith, I'm religiously required to do whatever I want, and for now, that so happens to include wearing black robes." So perhaps Ziz is some kind of weird take on the name Sith. Who knows with these Nazi nerds, but this Lasota character decided to make a religion out of a small part of a sci-fi franchise. So what does that tell you about this cult? See, this is the impact of Hollywood and how they make the bad guys seem so powerful and make them all out to be dark geniuses. This is how the white media moguls think of themselves. This is why all these movies glorify serial killers, dictators, corrupt corporate executives, because this is the kind of depravity that the creeps who run Hollywood engage in, and they want to validate their own sick behavior. So with the Zizians, we see life imitating art. But not surprisingly, Ziz soon had a falling out with the other rationalist. I guess they didn't think Ziz was rational enough. Ziz had been making ranting, nonsensical blog posts, and in one of them went on a long diatribe about the TV series The Office, artificial intelligence, and other subjects, writing, "I realized that I was no longer able to stand people, not even rationalists anymore, and I would live the rest of my life completely alone, hiding my reaction to anyone it was useful to interact with. I had given up my ability to see beauty so I could see evil." First Star Wars, now The Office. Clearly this Lasota character spent way too much time on Netflix. By 2019, Lasota must have begun recruiting members for the cult, because Lasota, along with 3 other individuals, were arrested for holding a protest outside a rationalist organization event. The last post on Ziz's blog was from around this time. In 2022, a warrant was issued for Lasota for having failed to show up for a court hearing related to that protest. Lasota's lawyers said that their client was deceased after a boating accident. Of course, Lasota committed a fake death hoax, court records show. The claim that Lasota had died originated with the individuals that he went on a boat trip with. Lasota had vanished into ocean waters, reportedly, halfway between Alameda and South San Francisco on August 19, 2022, according to 2 people who were on board Lasota's boat. The body was never found during a 2-day, 167 square nautical mile search by the U.S. Coast Guard. The Coast Guard said that it wasn't possible for anyone to survive in the bay's frigid waters beyond 24 hours. And none of Lasota's friends nor family ever heard from Lasota again after the incident. Lasota's own sibling, Emma Borhanian, declared that Ziz was lost at sea, writing a detailed account about what allegedly happened, saying Lasota leaned over the engine and fell in the water. An obituary published for Lasota stated that Lasota had loved adventure as well as music, blueberries, biking, computer games, and animals. I guess they must have forgotten about the Sith and The Office. November 15th, 2022. Not long after the fraudulent obituary was published, Lasota resurfaced, pun intended, along with other members of the cult, this time in Vallejo, California, which is north of San Francisco. They were living in vans and trucks on land owned by a man named Curtis Lind. At some point, the Zizians allegedly stopped paying rent, and Lind sued to evict them. But the dispute escalated, and in November 2022, Lind was attacked, stabbed 50 times, and blinded in one eye.
Patrick McMillan shows us how he found his landlord early Sunday morning, crouching over, bleeding, with a samurai sword through his chest.
He banged on my door, and I woke up and came out. And he said, "I'm dying," and he had blood squirting out of him. And that sword sticking through him.
McMillan says his 80-year-old landlord, Kurt Lind, had been brutally attacked by other tenants of the Vallejo property, who Lind was in the process of evicting because they hadn't paid rent in years.
They've been here for 3 years and they wouldn't leave, and it's taken him a long time to get into court and get, an eviction notice on him. They found out about the eviction notice. They figured, I guess, if they killed him that he couldn't be evicted.
But McMillan says Lind had a gun and shot 2 of his attackers.
There was one that was shot dead and the other had 3 bullets in her.
Carl Lind can't believe what his father has endured. He says the tenants had basically taken over the property and taken advantage of his father's generosity. Kurt Lind is recovering from multiple stab wounds, and his family says he may lose an eye. Police say 2 people are now in custody on murder charges.
He fired a gun which killed Emma Borhanian, who, by the way, was a former Google employee and one of the Zizians, and had previously been arrested at the Rationalist protest and was Ziz's sibling. 2 other members of the cult, Suri Dow and Somni Logencia, were arrested and charged with attempting to murder Lind. They remain in prison awaiting trial. Lesotho was also at the scene of the attack, but not surprisingly wasn't charged with a crime. So you got somebody who faked their own death, was declared dead, they had a warrant out for them due to a previous legal issue, the deceased magically reappears at the scene of an attempted murder, and the authorities are totally uninterested in them. Now that's weird even for California, but the very next month authorities say the Zizians would go from violent assaults and fake deaths to committing real killings. On December 31st, 2022, Richard Zachko and Rita Zachko were shot to death in their Chester Heights, Pennsylvania home on New Year's Eve. Richard and Rita were the parents of Michelle Zachko, who is one of the Zizian cultists. The double homicide remains under investigation, though it should be noted that just like Curtis Lind, the Zachkos were also landlords who rented out several homes. Police went to question the Zachko's child, Michelle, who lived in Vermont. A few weeks later, Michelle Zachko went to Pennsylvania and stayed at a hotel, which was the same hotel that Jack Lesotho was also staying at the time. Police in Pennsylvania took Michelle into custody, but of course released the suspect soon thereafter. Lesotho, miraculously, was also arrested and charged with obstructing the investigation and disorderly conduct, but of course nothing came of that either. January 17th, 2025, Curtis Lind is attacked again, only this time he's murdered. Prosecutors say that a man named Maximilian Snyder was trying to prevent Lind from testifying against his earlier attackers at their upcoming trial. It took 3 years to even bring this case, but then again, it's California. I suppose I should be glad that the charges were brought at all. January 20th, 2025. Only 3 days after the murder of Curtis Lind, the Zizians would shed more blood, this time in Coventry, Vermont, which is on the border with Canada. Border Patrol pulled over Teresa Youngblood and Felix Bockholt on Interstate 91 to conduct an immigration inspection. At the time, Bockholt appeared to have an expired visa, according to the Department of Homeland Security database, though investigators later confirmed that Bockholt's visa was current. According to the white media reports, Bockholt and Youngblood had been under surveillance by law enforcement for days prior to this pullover, so the Border Patrol's claims about an expired visa could very well have been a ruse to hold them for questioning. Youngblood, who had been driving Bockholt's car, got out of the vehicle without warning and opened fire on the Border Patrol agents. A shootout ensued. Bockholt tried to draw a gun but was shot and killed. During the exchange of gunfire, a Border Patrol agent named David Mayland also died. Youngblood, who was previously known as Milo, was wounded and later arrested on firearms charges. It would later be revealed that Maximilian Snyder, who's accused of murdering Curtis Lind, had taken out a marriage license in Washington state for himself and Teresa Youngblood. And earlier this month, Youngblood, Bockholt, and Jack Lesotho had been living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. On Sunday of last week, Lesotho was finally arrested along with Michelle Zachko. Among other things, federal authorities charged Michelle Zachko with providing false information in the purchase of 3 guns a year earlier in Vermont, where Zachko had been living. 2 of the guns allegedly had serial numbers that matched the weapons used in the Vermont shootout with Border Patrol. In addition to Lind, the Zachkos, and Agent Mayland, authorities also suspect Lesotho's killer cult of having committed at least 2 other killings as well. Now, other than the man-bites-dog aspect of all this, why am I making this the subject of this morning's briefing? Well, consider that the leader of this cult is a product of Silicon Valley, with ties to NASA, and that at least one of these cultists, Emma Borhanian, worked at Google. I might have expected someone to throw in some Silicon Valley tech giants' names into the piece, which is what they would do if these were black people. We just had one of Elon Musk's digital Klansmen ignite a scandal over past social media posts. There's something rotten going on in Silicon Valley, but of course it doesn't involve black people, so it's going to be dismissed, shoved down the memory hole. The white media won't even make any connections. But this is what's been coming out of Silicon Valley. None of the people involved were black. When it comes to this kind of weirdness, it's never black people doing it. Were these black people in the music industry, for example, they would have already arrested everyone involved long before it came to this. You had prosecutors trying to jam rappers up over their lyrics, when even the DAs admitted that there was no proof that the rappers in question did anything criminal themselves. But you have these lunatics skipping court dates, faking their own deaths, killing people, getting into shootouts with the feds, and during all this time the authorities are bumping into them time and again, and we see them letting them go time and again. This is the cost of America's color-coded injustice system. Racial immunity from law carries a heavy price, but this society long ago decided it would gladly pay that price, because this is how the society bestows privileges on those with the right skin color. America is a racist prison state, but only if you're black. Non-blacks, on the other hand, never have their movements impeded or get subject to strict policing. Doesn't matter how many warrants they've got, it's a coin toss whether or not they'll be enforced. They're allowed to come and go as they please. That's the law of the land, and this is the reason that law enforcement hyper-focuses on black people to an obscene degree, all in an effort to convince themselves that all of this murder and criminality from the dominant society isn't so bad. They're trying to convince us that we're the bad guys and convince themselves of their own morality. But while we can be disgusted at this sordid little episode, you certainly can't be surprised. The Zizians are basically a microcosm of America. After all, white supremacy is the biggest cult there is. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Samuel Divers, James Stiles, Midjet, Glenda Tice, and Mad Hatter. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.